this abuse. Yeah? But does stress actually do it? Or is it just a component? Because there are other people who get stressed who don't necessarily get abusive. Yeah? They might actually become more anxious, but not actually lash out. So it's a component, it's a variable, but it doesn't actually cause abuse. So we have to think about this, because people do have the power to take charge of themselves. We do have the ability. It's not that the other person is causing us that. We can always walk away. Okay? So these are some of the impacts, talking about domestic violence. So a lot of women that I will talk to will talk about the fear that you set up the back there, so extreme fear and anxiety, especially if they've been going through this for years and years. There's also the guilt. So what I hear a lot is blaming the other person. So again, you made me. And what happens is over time, there's almost a brainwashing where the other person starts to believe it. So the woman believes it's her fault. She feels guilty. She feels ashamed. She starts to isolate herself from friends as well, because they don't understand why she's still staying in this relationship. Do you think it's easy for people? Who thinks that it would be easy enough to walk away? Anyone? And the fact is that we do hear that a lot. Why doesn't the person just leave? Why do they stay in this relationship? But it's a lot more complex than that. And if you've had somebody continuously brainwashing you and putting you down and telling you that no one else would ever want you, you're fat, you're ugly, you're useless, you're worthless, that eventually they believe that, and so they stay because they think no one else would have me. And it's so hard to leave a relationship. There's so many things to think about. Where am I going to go? What money will I have? And quite often they're very dependent. And we talked before about the complexities of trying to find somewhere to move to. So it's the internalized blame, the isolation, the low self-esteem, and we find a lot of mental health issues will occur. So that anxiety, that depression that go hand in hand. Because if you can't express your thoughts and feelings, you will push them down, and that only leads to mental health issues. And then we hear, well, it's her fault anyway because she's crazy, she's got mental health issues, look, she's taking antidepressants, it's all her fault. But the fact is that that will be a consequence of going through that kind of abuse. We get a lot of mental health issues in the courts as well, where the perpetrator might have mental health issues. And that is really difficult because obviously if it's being dealt with in a domestic violence court, they quite often don't really have a clear understanding of the order or about breaching the order, and quite often don't care anyway. So that becomes another difficulty. Yeah. Again, impacts on young people, really huge. So again, that inability to concentrate at school, poor eating and sleeping disturbances. Quite often, young people will come to me who were self-harming because that was their only way of, they didn't want to feel what they were feeling. They'd had parents that were in an abusive relationship. One girl trying to step in between to try and stop the abuse from occurring. Again, fear and anxiety, depression, or swinging out and becoming angry yourself. I've discovered over the years that it's possible to swing from being passive and swinging out and being aggressive. So that can occur. And then we learn lessons, the disrespect towards maybe females or that male privilege. And I'm just really aware that there's guys in the room, and I'm not saying that all men are abusive. In fact, I really like that, it's about men standing up, and it's men's business. It's kind of like we need the guys to stand up too and say, we're not going to be bystanders to this abuse. So that's something else that we're starting to take out into the schools. And feeling overly responsible. So quite often blaming themselves because they've been blamed so much. And obviously the problems in school. Okay. Video next. Yeah, so as you're listening to this little clip, I want you to think about the impacts on this young child. Okay, you ready? That's too quiet. Oh
Okay, we're gonna be there. What's going on?
They're having a fight because this has been going on forever and ever.
How's he hurting her?
He made some red marks on Mom.
Where did he make the red marks on?
Her neck. Oh my God!
What's the matter? Is your mother? Hello?
And that really brings it home, doesn't it? Such a terrible thing that children to go through and the impacts on young children. And we wonder why domestic violence goes on and on. Is because it's intergenerational. And with this particular case, I had a look on the internet to see what actually happened. And she went on to then be in a domestic violence relationship herself as she grew up and went through similar type of abuse. And so it's so important that we can try and reach people to try and break that generational abuse, because when you grow up in that kind of thing, I mean, do you think, again, this is one of those myths, if you grow up in domestic violence, will you become abusive? Who thinks so? Yeah, we've got some. Yeah? Who thinks no? Yeah, we've got some no. Why would you think no? Any thoughts?
Growing up is more or less it's just a one big trip of character building.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff that's going to happen, and if that's the most you can take, well, that's that. You have to develop as a person before you can truly expect to go on later in life.
Wow.
If you think that's the end, just a little bit of that in childhood,
Yeah.
you need to develop a lot more to grow up properly.
So it's really working through that stuff, and that was very deep, but thank you. So for those that didn't hear, it's like, I guess what you were saying is that we can go through really difficult times, and everybody in their lives does go through difficult times, but it's working through that and looking at different ways of behaving. I think as a counsellor, one of the hardest things that I've had to think about is that it felt like, is there going to be a change? Can we change this? Is this possible? And as I studied my psychology degree and I learned about those pathways in your brain, and I looked at, for an example, learning to play tennis. I learned to play tennis myself. And so the way I hit the ball is that I will hit it up and I don't make that turn on the end. And no matter how hard I try, I will do the lesson, but then when I get into a match, I go back to my old ways. So it's that first learn response. So it's about changing the pathways in your brain that say, when this happens, I will do this. Is it possible to change? Yes. So we can. It's like your resting temperament is about 25%. The learned behaviours are the 75%. So we can change. If it's learnt, it can be relearnt. But unfortunately, you've got to keep working on it. You have to keep on practicing. So if someone's putting themselves down, their self-talk is belittling themselves. It's about changing what you're saying to yourself and starting to create new pathways, because there is no perfect person. And we're all a work in progress, as you said. It's about working through the things that happen to us. So growing up in domestic violence doesn't mean that you have to become abusive. But unfortunately, when you learn those things, and this is the way that we resolve conflict, is that quite often, if there's no intervention or there's no understanding or self-awareness, that can result in either becoming a victim or a perpetrator of abuse, or swinging between the two. So yes, it can change. Thank you. So huge issues for children. Pregnancy. So I don't know, did anyone notice that on those 13 people that were killed through domestic violence, did anyone see the one that had an unborn child? Yeah. Why do you think, as a risk factor, if someone is pregnant, why would we have that as a risk factor? Why would that be? Why would being pregnant be something that I'm concerned about? Yeah?
Because you have two lives in your hands,
Yes.
as in one person.
That's correct. And it looks like that person would be convicted for the death of the unborn child. As a perpetrator, what am I afraid of? Why do I not want that unborn child? Have a guess. Have a wild guess. Yeah?
Because she wants to spend more time with the baby.
Exactly. So I'm so jealous and so fearful that you're going to leave me. I want your undivided attention. You are here to meet my needs and my needs alone, because I don't feel worthy, and so therefore I need you to make me feel worthy. I'm now jealous of that unborn child, because you're going to probably give that child more attention than me, and then my needs will not be met. That's one theory. Yeah?
Oh, could it also have something to do with, in the way that he would also be attached to that person, because the man, now that family can't leave now, obviously?
That's right. So in some cases, I want to see this person barefoot and pregnant. I actually want you to be pregnant. I'm encouraging you to have a child, because that way you'll be more dependent on me. But then as things progress, now you're fat and ugly. And not only that, is that you might give that attention to that child. So I am always thinking, when I'm hearing pregnancy, I feel concerned, and that's very sad. We're going to cover some of the risk factors that we're always looking at when we're doing a risk assessment, and unfortunately that is one of them. So huge impacts on babies, not sleeping well, irritable, not feeding, they have attachment issues, and can have developmental problems. Okay, we'll move on. Some of those things that we've talked about with a perpetrator of abuse, so that sense of entitlement, it's all about me. Minimising and denying. So one of the things that I found really hard working in the men's group is challenging. So as a woman, I'm working with a male co-facilitator, and my role is to try and mirror what a good relationship looks like in the way that we're interacting. And so I did have one experience where I had to actually, address a person and say, I can hear what you're saying, it must be very difficult for you not being able to see your children. I'm imagining that, at Christmas time, so I was being very gentle in the way that I was actually confronting, and then I added, but to slap the person around and to do what you did, that would be abuse. And I thought they were going to come off the chairs. So it's that real minimising what's happening. And the whole idea is, in the men's group, is to actually challenge that in a good way, recognising a person's worth, but addressing that behaviour and looking at different ways that we can behave. And quite often that person has come from an abusive background, and I've found that if we talk about, like what we've just seen, the impacts on the children, that is a way of getting under those defences and reaching that person. What is this like for your kids? What was that like for you? Do you want something different for them? So it's complexities. When you're thinking about domestic violence, it is huge. Someone trying to get out of DV has got to face so many different issues. So sometimes, one of the things that I do is I attend what we call It's like a case management, so I'll attend with probations and parole, child safety, I'll attend with police, and then we come in as a non-government organisation. So what we're doing is we're doing risk management, so a case might be brought to the table. There are protocols around information sharing. We don't share information unless that person is at high risk, and usually with that person's consent. So when you're thinking about someone who's escaping domestic violence, it's very complex because they might actually be involved with the child safety, and child safety have brought attention to the fact that a child is being neglected or that there's an open investigation. And so that they haven't necessarily identified domestic violence as the primary reason. So in the past, police used to go to a home, and if a child was present, they would then mandatory report back and to child safety that children were present. That has changed somewhat. I'm not quite sure of the exact how that's working now, but it has changed to some degree. But you can imagine that if the person who's being abused is having her children possibly taken away from her if she doesn't leave that relationship. So there's all those difficulties around, I've got children, now child safety are involved, their focus is on the child. And as DV services, we've kind of grown up in different silos, and our focus is on the woman. We need to come together. So at the moment with the Carmody report, you're seeing child safety and domestic violence services working very closely together with police and with probations and parole, because we need to come together as organisations to address people's safety. And that's the safety of women and children and holding perpetrators accountable. And if you look at that domestic violence legislation, that is what it's about. It's about who is in most need of protection. Necessary and desirable is the language that they use. So we need to look at a lot of different factors around that. So where is the person going to go to? We need to get them out of the situation they're into. We would possibly be looking at a domestic violence order. That means they've got to go through domestic violence court. Can you imagine having written all that in an application? The application is then served on the perpetrator, and now I have to come to court and I have to stand, or I'm sitting, he's here, but he's actually in the courtroom. So I've got to now go into court and face that person who's been abusive towards me. Some women are so terrified, and because they've been blamed for years and years and years, trying to get them to come into the courtroom is very, very difficult. So part of our role is to go into the courtroom. We used to sit beside them at the bar, but we've now been demoted to sit in the front row of the seats. Reason being was because one of our workers had heard the woman's story whilst being in the safe room, and she'd heard a lot more than what was in the actual application. And so when she took her into court, and our worker could see that possibly this woman wasn't going to get her application, she spoke out. And as court support workers, we're not allowed to speak. That's not our role. We're there to support. Sometimes we sit between, so we're blocking that gaze, and we debrief with people and talk about the outcome once we go out of court. So since then we've been demoted to the front row seats, which is often quite hard because we are privileged to, or we're privy to hear information that is quite often not known to the court. And that's where we'll assist people to have additional information. Complexities, if you want to go back just one more slide so I can make sure I've got those. So family law, people are going to be going through family law possibly at the same time as going through a domestic violence court, because now if they're separating, there's going to be property involved possibly, there's going to be contact orders about who's going to see the child.